Hello, and welcome back to Sleeping Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Sleeping Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Dolly has always been obsessed with bones. Not in a cute, normal dog way either. She treats a bone like it's the most important thing on earth, like it's a treasure that has to be protected, moved, hidden, checked on, and rehidden. After work, I'd often sit in a chair out in the yard and watch her routine like it was a nightly show. She'd dig a hole, drop the bone in, pat it with her nose, cover it, then immediately decide it wasn't the right spot. A few minutes later, she'd be trotting across the grass with it again, looking for a better hiding place. Sometimes she'd do this over and over until the yard looked like it had been hit with a tiny, determined backhoe. One evening, I was watching her pace and dig when she suddenly barked at a sound beyond the fence. Dolly's bark wasn't playful. It was sharp and serious, like she was warning someone they'd stepped too close. I called her over, expecting her to come running like she always did. She ran straight to me with her bone. She jumped up, put the bone carefully on my lap like she was offering it, then grabbed it back just as quickly, hopped down, and took off again like she'd only stopped by to remind me it existed. The weird part was that Dolly never brought her bone inside. Never. She didn't chew it on the couch, didn't carry it through the kitchen, didn't drop it on the bedroom floor. She only stored it outside, in the holes she dug. Like the yard was her personal vault. When I went back indoors, she followed me, stopping to drink water first, then padding after me through the house like my shadow. Dolly was loyal in a way that still surprises me sometimes. With me, she was sweet and physical, always leaning into my legs, always pressing her head against my hand, always needing to be close enough to touch. With strangers, she was the opposite. If someone came by, visitors, delivery people, yard workers, Dolly turned into a different dog. She didn't lunge or act wild, but she watched them like she was counting their breaths. She stayed between me and the door. If they moved too fast, she stiffened. If they stepped inside without me greeting them first, she'd let out this low sound in her chest that didn't feel like a warning so much as a promise. She was a terrier and pit bull mix, solid and muscular, all energy and curiosity outside the house. On walks, she acted like she owned the whole neighborhood. She'd sniff everything, pull toward interesting smells, and soak up attention when people wanted to pet her. Her protective instincts only switched on when someone entered our home, like the house was the one place she didn't treat like a shared space. That night, she followed me into my bedroom, hopped onto the bed, and curled into a tight little donut shape. It was her comfort zone. I climbed in too, expecting her to take her usual spot on the other side. Instead, she pressed herself against my legs. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. I remember thinking she was being extra clingy, like she needed reassurance. I scratched behind her ears and let myself drift off. When I woke up, she woke up too, like she could hear my eyes open. I went to the bathroom, and the moment I stepped out, she went nuts on the bed, flipping blankets, shoving her nose under pillows, tossing everything around like she was hunting for something hidden in the sheets. Dolly did stuff like that sometimes. She was a weirdo, and I loved her for it. I let her outside, fed her, then made coffee and started thinking through my day. Work, errands, the usual mental list that always ended with the same thought: get through it and come home. That day at work was frustrating in the normal way. Too much to do, not enough patience, people asking for things like I wasn't already busy. All I wanted by the end of it was a shower and the mindless comfort of TV. When I pulled into my driveway, Dolly came racing toward me like she always did, tail moving so hard her whole body wiggled. But before she ran all the way to me, she stopped by one of her holes, dropped her bone in it like she was clocking in for a shift, then sprinted over to greet me properly. That was Dolly, Bone first, then affection. I went to bed early that night, and she curled up beside me. I woke up well rested, with her still there, warm against my legs. She was honestly my best friend. I didn't spend time with anyone the way I spent time with her. She was with me almost all day, if not physically, then mentally. I knew her moods. I knew her routines. I knew what it meant when her ears tilted a certain way or when her paws started digging at the ground like she was itching to run. And she loved me, too. I could tell by how she leaned into me, how she tried to crawl into my lap even though she wasn't a small dog anymore. Her favorite place in the whole house was my couch, where I kept a mound of fuzzy blankets. Dolly would settle in that pile like it was her nest, then stare at me as if to say, "Don't you dare move me." Sometimes I needed a fully cleaned house, and that couch was the main problem. It wasn't that she couldn't lie down somewhere else. She could. She just didn't want to if it meant losing her blanket mound. If I picked her up and moved her, she'd trot away with her tail tucked like I'd offended her, then circle back the second she thought it was safe. That was our life for a long time. Work, home, Dolly, repeat. Then one night I came home and decided I was staying in. I didn't want to run errands, didn't want to see anyone, didn't want anything except quiet. I opened the door and called for Dolly to come inside like I always did. She didn't move. She was sitting by one of her holes near the fence, body tense, staring down at the dirt like she was guarding a secret. I called her again. I used the voice that usually worked, the one that meant treat time or cuddle time. Nothing. She didn't even look at me. She stayed locked onto that spot like her life depended on it. I stood there for a few seconds, annoyed, then uneasy. The yard light washed over her back and made her look like a statue. "Fine," I muttered, and left the light on for her. The next morning I woke up alone, which was unusual. Dolly always came in at some point in the night. Even if she stayed outside late, she'd scratch at the door eventually and then curl up with me like it was part of her job. I filled a bowl of food and went outside. Dolly was still there. Same place, same posture, alert, focused, guarding the hole. I called her name and shook the bowl a little. Usually that sound worked like magic. She didn't come. She didn't even stand. I set the food down nearby and watched her for a second. She glanced at the bowl, then back at the hole, like eating was optional, but whatever was in that dirt wasn't. I had to get to work, so I left, unsettled and irritated at myself for being unsettled. Dogs do weird stuff. Dogs fixate on smells. Maybe a rabbit burrowed under the fence. Maybe she'd found a mole. Maybe there was a dead animal down there. When I came home later, Dolly was still posted at the hole. Her food bowl was empty, which meant she'd eaten at some point, but she hadn't moved far. That night I tried to get close, but every time I walked toward the hole, she shifted her body in front of it and stared at me like I'd become the stranger. Not growling, not snapping, just making it clear, you are not welcome here. The next morning I decided I was done guessing. I put out her food and watched her from the window like I was spying on my own dog. I waited hours. She paced, she looked at the hole, she looked at me through the glass, but she wouldn't eat. It was like she didn't want to take her eyes off the dirt, even long enough to swallow. Around midday, she finally went to her bowl. The moment her head dropped into the food, I moved. I went through the house quietly, opened the French doors in my bedroom, and stepped outside on the far side so she wouldn't hear the door I normally used. I stayed low and moved fast, keeping the house between me and her line of sight until I was close enough to see into the hole. I expected to find a chewed-up toy, maybe an old bone from the trash, maybe a dead animal, something gross but explainable. What I saw didn't make sense. Sitting on a mound of wet mud inside the hole were 4 connected vertebrae, a little stack of spine still joined together. For a second, my brain tried to turn it into something harmless. A piece of plastic, a Halloween decoration, some weird chew toy someone dropped. I reached down and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. It was cold. The surface felt wrong, not smooth like plastic, not porous like a dog treat. It felt real in a way I can't describe without making my stomach flip again. I rolled it between my fingers and my mouth went dry. My hands started shaking. I dropped it back into the hole like it had burned me, then stumbled backward. I didn't want to believe what it was, but I couldn't come up with a better answer either. Dolly had dug up bones before. Animal bones, old chew bones I didn't recognize. But this was different. This looked like something from an anatomy textbook. I called the police. I remember how my voice sounded on the phone, embarrassed and frightened at the same time. Like I knew how crazy it sounded, and I couldn't stop it anyway. I think my dog has human remains in my yard, I said. There was a pause on the line. A shift in tone. The dispatcher asked me questions like I was pranking them. Then my answers must have convinced them, because her voice turned careful and professional, and she told me to stay inside. A squad car showed up, then another. The officers approached the hole while Dolly barked like she'd been insulted. One of them leaned down, stared, then looked at me in a way that made my stomach sink further. He pulled on gloves, lifted the vertebrae, and sealed them in an evidence bag. Nobody explained anything. One officer walked me back toward the house, and right before he left me alone, he said flatly, "You're gonna want to pack." That was it. No answers, no reassurance. Just that sentence, like a warning you don't get to ask questions about. I booked a hotel that had a washer and dryer. I stayed there 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I washed everything I'd brought from home, once a week. Sheets, blankets, clothes, even things that didn't need it. It wasn't logical. It was fear trying to make itself useful. If something had been in my yard, if someone had been in my yard, then what else had touched my life without me knowing? Dolly hated being inside the hotel. She paced, she stared at the door, she whined to go out, not for a walk, but like she wanted to return to her post. I'd brought her normal chew bone with me, thinking it would comfort her. She didn't even look at it. It was like her real chew bone had stopped existing, like whatever she'd been guarding back home had made everything else worthless. When I was finally allowed back, the yard had been worked over. The police and whoever else had been out there had dug, searched, sifted, restored. The hole where Dolly had stashed her bone was gone, filled in and flattened. Dolly rushed outside and immediately began searching. She ran from spot to spot, nose to the ground, then started digging in a panic. She dug like she was trying to rescue something. She didn't find it. She dug anyway. For days she whined, a sound I'd never heard from her before, high and desperate. It broke my heart. Then slowly she stopped. She returned to her usual routines. She played again. She cuddled again. She slept through the night. I thought it was over. It lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Dolly was back at a hole in the yard, guarding it like her life depended on it. She wouldn't let me near it. She barked, she yapped, she paced in circles. The same behavior, same intensity like she had reset to the beginning of the nightmare. I couldn't believe it. How was she finding bones after the yard had been searched? After it had been dug up and restored? It didn't make any sense. I went outside, walked straight toward her, and pushed past her as she jumped and slobbered on my hands in frantic protest. I didn't care if she scratched me. I needed to know. Inside the hole, half buried in fresh mud, was a hip bone. Not a small piece, an entire pelvis, thick and curved, unmistakably human. I felt my knees go weak. I called the police again. Another relocation. Another round of questions. Dolly looked confused and stressed when the officers removed her toy, like she couldn't understand why everyone kept stealing what she'd worked so hard to keep. The police dug again. They found nothing else. No full skeleton, no clothing, no obvious grave. No explanation for why these bones were appearing in my yard in pieces. One of the officers, different from the first time, stood with the evidence bag in his gloved hands and looked at Dolly like she was a puzzle he hated. "If you could follow your dog for a day," he said, "see where she leaves, see if she goes somewhere to get her treasures." He handed the bag to another officer, peeled off his gloves, and looked back at me. Call us back if this happens again. Then they were gone, and my house was mine again. Except it didn't feel like mine. It felt like something had marked it. I waited for a day when Dolly seemed especially normal, like she wasn't on edge, like she wasn't hearing something I couldn't hear. Then I decided to do exactly what the officer suggested. A few boards on my fence were loose. I'd noticed it before, but I never thought much about it. Dolly could squeeze through when she wanted. I told myself she didn't go far. I told myself she always came back. Now I didn't have the luxury of pretending. The next time she slipped out, I followed her. I felt ridiculous crawling low across my own grass like I was in some spy movie, but I didn't want her to notice me. I didn't want her to change her behavior. I moved slowly, keeping to shadows and shrubs, listening for the jingle of her collar and the quick tap of her nails. She went through the loose boards like it was a door she'd used 100 times. I followed, then another fence, then another. It was easier for her than for me. Dolly moved like she knew the route, like she'd been practicing. Finally, she stopped in a yard a short distance away. There was a gazebo back there, and she went straight for it. She began digging under the gazebo like she'd done it before. My skin went cold. I watched her dig down, then shift her body, pushing her head deeper under the edge. She wriggled like she was reaching for something stored away. Then she backed out with something in her mouth. Another bone. I didn't wait to see more. I rushed forward, grabbed her collar, and pulled her away. She resisted, confused, trying to get back to her hole, but I dragged her out of that yard as fast as I could without making a scene. We got home, and I called the police immediately. They swarmed the neighboring house within minutes. More officers than I expected, floodlights, radios. That kind of tense movement that tells you they already suspect something and just needed a reason. The owner was arrested in front of his family. I watched from my yard with Dolly pressed against my leg, trembling with excitement and confusion, and I remember thinking two things at once. Relief that I wasn't crazy, and horror at what that meant had been near me the whole time. After that, I fixed the fence properly. New boards, no gaps, no easy escape. I told myself those days were over. For a while, they were. Dolly went back to being normal. She dug her harmless holes. She chased squirrels. She cuddled on her blanket mound like the world hadn't changed. Months passed. Then one day, Dolly became protective again. She picked one specific hole and treated it like it was sacred. She wouldn't let me near it. Every time I stepped toward it, she placed herself in front of it. Eyes hard, body tense. Not aggressive in the way that makes you call animal control, but determined in a way that made my stomach sink with recognition. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself she'd found a rabbit nest, a buried animal bone, something left behind from before. Anything. Then I caught a glimpse of what she was guarding, a snapped femur. The shape registered instantly, even though I didn't want it to. The thick curve, the broken end, the size. I backed away so fast I almost tripped. I walked down the street, heart racing, and without thinking too hard about what I was doing, I went to the house where the man had been arrested, the one with the gazebo. Police tape was long gone. The yard looked different now. The gazebo was gone. The concrete foundation that had held it was gone too, ripped out like someone wanted to erase the entire thing. The area under it looked scraped clean. Fresh dirt covered everything. Not a single hole was visible. Nothing looked like it could hide anything anymore. So how did Dolly have a femur? I stood there staring at the ground until my skin prickled, like I could feel eyes on me, even though the street was quiet. I went home and tried to let it go. I was tired. Tired of police, tired of temporary relocations, tired of living in a loop where the worst thing that could happen kept happening again. And I was tired of being the person who called authorities and waited for them to tell me what my own life meant. So I did something I never thought I would do. I let Dolly keep it. I hated myself for it at first. I kept telling myself I'd call it in tomorrow. I kept telling myself it was just for one night, just until I had the energy to deal with it again. But tomorrow became the next day and the next. Dolly guarded her new toy day and night. She slept near it. She ate near it. She'd follow me around the house, then rush back outside to check on it as if she couldn't relax unless she knew it was still there. Eventually, she got comfortable enough to bring it to me. She placed it near my feet like she was offering it the way she'd offered her old chew bone that day in the yard. She watched my face, tail wagging carefully, as if she wanted approval. I didn't give her any. I couldn't. But I also didn't take it away. That became our new normal. Weird, quiet, sickening normal. Then one afternoon, Dolly came back with something that made my blood turn to ice. Half a skull. Not a small fragment. A heavy, unmistakable chunk, pale and curved, with shapes that my brain recognized immediately, even while begging not to. Dolly carried it proudly, mouth stretched around it, tail up, eyes bright like she'd found the best treasure yet. By then, there was no way it had come from the house down the street. That place was already on the market, desperate to sell. The police had torn the yard apart. They wouldn't have missed half a skull. And even if they had, there weren't any holes left. The ground had been turned and packed and smoothed, like someone was trying to wipe the past away. I stood there in my yard, holding my breath, while Dolly dropped the skull piece beside her hole and stood over it like a guard. I didn't understand how she was finding these remains. I still don't. But I was tired of asking questions that never got answered. I was tired of calling people who looked at me like I was a problem to solve. I was tired of living like my home was a crime scene that never fully cleared. So I let Dolly be with her new chew toys. She protected them at all hours, day and night, like she'd been given a job by something I couldn't see. And I went back to my routine. Work, home, Dolly. Except now there was always a part of me listening for the scrape of her digging in the yard, waiting for whatever she'd bring up next, and wondering, in the quiet moments, whether she was finding bones at all, or whether something was leaving them for her. Dolly, my dog, is passionate about bones. She often runs around the yard, moving her bone from one hole to another, rarely leaving it in the same spot for long. After work one day, I watched her routine from my chair and called her over when she barked at a noise beyond the fence. She brought her bone to me, placed it on my lap, then retrieved it and ran off again. Dolly never brings her bone inside. She always stores it in the holes she has dug. When I returned indoors, Dolly followed, stopping for water before accompanying me through the house. She is loyal and affectionate with me, but cautious around strangers, especially visitors or yard workers. Dolly, a strong terrier and pit bull mix, is energetic and curious on walks and enjoys attention from others. Her protective instincts only emerge when someone enters our home. Dolly followed me into my bedroom and curled up into a small donut shape, falling asleep in her comfort zone. I climbed into bed and curled up at my legs instead of the other side. When I woke up, Dolly woke up as well. As I used the bathroom, she went wild on the bed, tossing blankets upside down. She was a weirdo. I let her outside and gave her food before making coffee. I thought through my day as usual, focusing on getting back home. Work was frustrating, and all I wanted was a shower and to watch TV. I let Dolly inside. She first set down her bone in one of her holes, then ran to me. She was always excited to see me when I returned. I went to bed early, and Dolly curled up next to me as always. I felt well rested when I woke up with her by my side. She was truly my best friend, and I didn't spend time like this with anyone else. She was with me 95% of the day. I knew she loved me by the sweet affection and lap hugs as she settled on my fuzzy blanket. That was her favorite spot, a mound of fuzzy blankets. She never wanted to get off, so you had to pick her up or push her away as she ran with her tail between her legs. Sometimes I just needed a fully cleaned house, and my couch was the focus. It's not that she couldn't lie back down, she just wouldn't have a mound of blankets to return to. One night, when I came home from work, I decided to stay in. I tried to get Dolly to come inside, but she wouldn't leave a spot by one of her holes. I called her, but she didn't budge. so I left the light on for her. The next morning, I woke up alone and checked on Dolly with a bowl of food. She didn't come to me, she just sat there, protective and alert. I set her food down and went to work. Whatever she had in that hole, she was serious about it. When I returned, Dolly lay by her hole, and her food bowl was empty. I had to catch her while she was eating to get close and see inside the hole. The next morning, I put out her food and watched her. I waited until midday when she finally went for her bowl. I went around the house, opened the French doors in my bedroom, and sneaked to the hole without drawing attention. I thought it was a joke when I saw what was inside. There were 4 connected vertebrae in the hole, stashed on a big mound of mud. I picked it up and turned it over, thinking it was plastic, but it felt real as I rolled it between my fingers. I was too freaked out and called the cops to report that my dog had human remains in my yard. They thought I was joking at first, but then took me seriously and sent a squad. When the officers saw it, they put it in an evidence bag and walked me to my room. "You're gonna want to pack," is all the officers said before leaving me alone with no answers. I found a hotel with a washer and dryer, and during the 3 weeks I stayed there, I washed all my belongings once a week, including the sheets and blankets I brought from home. Who is to trust these days? Dolly hated being inside and was neglecting her real chew bone completely. She didn't want anything to do with it or even look at it. When we finally restored our yard and dug up the hole where her bone was, Dolly searched everywhere for it. She desperately dug, but never found it. The poor dog whined for days until she stopped and returned to her usual self. This lasted about 3 days before she was back protecting her hole. I couldn't believe it. How was she digging up bones after the yard had been scoured? I went out, pushed Dolly aside as she yapped and slobbered on me, and saw a hip bone, an entire pelvis to be exact. I contacted the police again, resulting in another temporary relocation. Dolly seemed confused and distressed by the loss of her toys. The police found no further evidence and remained puzzled about the source of the bones. If you could follow your dog for a day, see where she leaves and see if she goes somewhere to get her treasures. The officer placed the hip bone into an evidence bag, then handed it to the officer and removed his gloves. "Call us back if this happens again." He nodded his head at me, and my house was mine again. I went through the cycle with Dolly and waited for a day when she was especially normal to follow her. A few boards were loose on my fence, and Dolly left the yard whenever she wanted. I crawled on the ground, slowly following her as best I could. I went through 2 fences before Dolly stopped in a yard and began digging under a gazebo. I watched her go past the concert and dig down and around the building to fetch another bone. I got Dolly and left that yard quickly, then went home and told the police what I saw. The house was swarmed with officers within minutes, and the owner was arrested in front of his family. I fixed the fence where Dolly had been escaping, hoped those escapades were over, and returned to my routine. Dolly was normal and great to be around again. Months later, Dolly became very protective of her hole and didn't let me near it, afraid I'd take it away. I caught a glimpse of a snapped femur and immediately stepped back. I went down the street and, just to be sure, went behind the police tape into the backyard. The gazebo was gone, as was the concrete foundation that had held the body. The area was picked clean, and I didn't understand how she got this bone. There was fresh dirt everywhere and not a single hole to be witnessed. I went home and let it be. I didn't know why this was happening and was tired of dealing with officials, so I let my dog keep her bone. Eventually, she got comfortable enough to give it to me to hold for a moment. It was weird, but it was life, and I went with the flow. Then one day, she came back with half a skull, and by this time, there was no way it was coming from the house down the street. That house was already on the market and desperate to sell. The police would not have missed half a skull anyways. It was a large hunk, and that yard with the remains did not have a single hole in it. I didn't understand how she was finding these human remains, but I was tired of asking questions, so I let Dolly be with her new chew toys, which she protected all hours of the day and night. GPT 5-2. Growing up, I had a friendship that ended after we went through something terrible together. I used to think that kind of experience would glue people together forever. Like if you survive something horrifying with someone, you become a team for life. But that's not what happened. His name was Marvin. If you were casting a movie about small-town Midwest life, Marvin would have been the kid you picked to represent everything is fine here. Two parents who loved him. Steady, decent jobs. An only child. A clean little house. The kind of family that showed up to school events and smiled in photos and looked like they ate dinner together at the same time every night. For a while, Marvin really did have that smile everyone expects from a kid like that. Then his grandmother died, and the smile changed. Not all at once. It just got harder for him to find. She'd been sick for a long time. Cancer. The kind of sickness that makes grown-ups speak softly and close doors when children walk into a room. We were in 3rd grade when she finally passed, and even at that age I could tell the whole town felt it. She wasn't just a grandmother to Marvin, she was a local fixture. She'd owned the general store downtown, the one everyone called the old store, even though it still sold the normal stuff. Candy by the register, gardening gloves, batteries, cheap toys, sandwiches wrapped in plastic. Her family had opened it back in the 1800s when the town was founded, and over the generations they became the closest thing our town had to royalty. Not rich royalty, not glamorous. Just the kind of family everyone knew, everyone trusted, everyone talked about in that warm way people talk about tradition. Marvin's grandma was part of that feeling. She had a smile that made adults slow down and make conversation even if they were in a hurry. When you walked into the store, she looked up like she was genuinely happy you existed. That kind of kindness is rare, and you notice it more when it's gone. Every summer holiday, she organized these big community gatherings through the church. She'd set up tables on the lawn of her house, and there would be food and music and people sitting in the grass until dark. Her house was a 2-story Victorian up on Denbrook Hill, just off Walter Avenue. It always seemed like it was watching over the town. When I was little, it felt like the safest place in the world. Like if you went there, nothing bad could happen to you, because her warmth filled every room. Then she died, and somehow the warmth went with her. After the funeral, the house sat up there like an empty shell. The store stayed open. Her son Marvin's dad kept it running. But the house felt different, even from the outside. Not haunted in a cartoon way, just abandoned. Windows dark. Curtains still. The kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. It stayed empty for years. Marvin's dad took it hard. He was grieving his mother, trying to keep the store afloat, handling finances, working his own job, and facing this big, memory-filled house that didn't feel like it belonged to him. From what I heard, he spent a long time renovating it. Not just fixing things, but trying to make it new enough that it didn't feel like he was living inside his mother's life. Marvin wasn't excited about moving into it. None of us would have been, honestly, even without anything supernatural. It's hard for a kid to feel comfortable in a place that's basically a monument to someone who's gone, especially when the whole town acts like that person was a saint. They moved in right as we were starting middle school. It was one of those times in life where everything already feels unstable. New building, new schedules, new social rules, and then your friend shows up with an extra weight in his eyes. The first Monday after the move, Marvin sat across from me at lunch. We were in that loud cafeteria where nothing ever sounded private. He leaned forward like he had to force the words out. "Can you stay over this Friday?" he asked. My parents said it would be okay. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual while chugging my barely thawed chocolate milk. I'm sure my parents would be fine with it. If anything, he looked like he'd just checked something off a list. The week dragged. English, math, history, the usual boring rhythm. But Marvin changed day by day. He started showing up with dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep should have caused in a 12-year-old. He seemed irritated all the time, like his nerves were rubbed raw. He snapped at people, not in a cruel way, but in a way that told me he was exhausted and couldn't keep up the energy it took to be nice. He had always been easy to get along with, one of those kids who could float between groups and never cause drama. Seeing him become sharp and distant felt wrong. Most of us assumed it was grief, or stress, or the weirdness of moving into his dead grandmother's house. That explanation fit well enough that no one questioned it too hard. Friday finally came. By the time the last bell rang, I was more excited than nervous. A sleepover was still a big deal at that age. Marvin and I rode the bus together, and I slid into the aisle seat beside him. He leaned his head against the cool glass of the window like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Are you okay?" I asked. His eyes fluttered open like it took effort. He sat up slowly and rubbed his face. "I'm all right," he said. "It's just weird sleeping in her house, you know." I nodded. I didn't have the right words, but I understood what he meant. When my grandpa died, it took me months to accept it, and he wasn't even the kind of person the whole town loved. Losing someone important changes the shape of your life, and when you're a kid, you don't have the tools for it. You just feel it and hope it goes away. The bus dropped us off near the corner of Walter and Fifth. From there, we could see Denbrook Hill rising above the street, and at the top of it was the house. It looked bigger than it used to, or maybe I just hadn't seen it in a while, and now that we were older, it didn't feel like a storybook house anymore. It felt like a real building full of real empty rooms. What stood out most was the light. The old house had always glowed warmly at night, like the windows were lit by soft yellow lamps. Now it was bright and cold, LED white, almost blue. It made the house look sharper, less welcoming, like a place you'd see in a high-definition photo where every shadow looks too clean. Marvin's dad was an engineer and obsessed with efficiency. Everyone in town knew that. It didn't surprise me that he'd converted the whole place to LED lighting as soon as he moved in. It did make the house stand out, though. The rest of our street lights and porch lights still had that older yellow glow. The house on Denbrook Hill looked like it belonged to a different era, new light in an old shell. We walked up the hill, and by the time we reached the front porch, I could see details I'd ignored as a kid. The front doors were original African mahogany, polished and well cared for. They looked expensive, heavy, and serious, like they were meant to keep something in, or keep something out. Marvin pulled a ring of keys from his backpack. There were a lot of them, more than I'd ever seen a kid carry. Each key had a little label. "What's with all the keys?" I asked, half joking. He didn't smile. He just found the right one, unlocked the front door, and held it open for me. Inside, the house was exactly the kind of grand old place people pay money to tour. A staircase rose up to a landing, wide and elegant. To the right was a big living room. Down the hall, under the upstairs landing, was the kitchen in the back with a dining room attached. I remembered all of this from summer gatherings and quick visits to the general store owner's house. But it looked different now. Renovated. The carpet that used to cover the stairs was gone. Polished wood gleamed under the light. The banister looked restored, glossy and smooth. Even at 12, I felt that quiet awe you feel in an old house when it's been taken care of. It had history in the walls, and despite the cold glow outside, inside the place felt warm. Not just temperature warm, the kind of warmth you feel when a space has been loved for a long time. I felt it the moment I stepped in, like a memory trying to wrap itself around me. Marvin didn't seem to notice. He pushed past me and headed upstairs. I followed him, trying to match his pace. At the landing upstairs, we entered a hallway lined with doors, 4 evenly spaced, 2 on each side, and 1 at the end. One door was cracked open, and I recognized it as the bathroom from years ago. The door at the very end of the hall was closed, and even without thinking, I knew it had been his grandmother's room. Marvin stopped at the second door on the left. "This one's mine," he said, unlocking it. Then he pointed down the hall at the far door. "Mom and Dad took that one after the renovation," he said. "The others are guest rooms." His tone was flat, like he was reciting facts he didn't want to think about. We went into his room. Marvin dropped his backpack and fell face first onto his bed like his body had finally given up. His voice was muffled in the pillows. "Can you lock the door?" I hesitated. "Is that safe? Like, in case of a fire?" He laughed, but it didn't sound amused. It sounded tired. "There's a window for that. We'd probably be safer going that way compared to the stairs." "If you say so," I said, and I locked it. The click of the lock felt too loud in the quiet hallway. Marvin got up and opened the window. Cool air poured in, a clean breeze that felt good against the house's steady warmth. The radiator under the window gave off that old heat that smells faintly metallic and dusty, like it's been doing the same job for 100 years. For a while, the night was normal. Marvin perked up after we tore into snacks and sugary drinks. We played video games like everything was the same as always. Smash Brothers turned into Halo. We argued about controllers and laughed and yelled. Every so often I'd glance over at Marvin and see those dark circles under his eyes, like the tiredness was painted on him and wouldn't wash off. I also noticed something else. Every time we left the room, even just to grab something, Marvin checked the lock, every single time. And whenever we passed a door in the hallway, it seemed like he paid attention to whether it was shut properly, like the position of each door mattered. I didn't ask. I told myself it was part of adjusting to a big old house. Old houses creak. Old houses make noises. If you get spooked once, you start doing weird things to feel safer. A few hours later, Marvin's mom called up the stairs that dinner was ready. Chinese takeout. The smell hit me immediately. Orange chicken, fried rice, lo mein. That salty sweet restaurant smell that makes you hungry even if you weren't a minute ago. It pulled me down the stairs like a cartoon. Marvin went ahead of me, and I was so focused on the food that it took me a second to notice something small and sharp behind it. The sound of a lock. Click. It wasn't our bedroom door. It was something downstairs. I wasn't sure what, but the sound registered in my brain anyway, and I didn't like that it did. We ate with his parents at the dining table. For a little while, everything felt good. Normal. His dad joked with us, his mom laughed. The food was great. For a few minutes, I could almost believe the house was just a house again, and Marvin was just tired because moving is exhausting, and middle school is stressful, and grief takes time. Then I heard a sound from upstairs, soft, almost nothing, like something being pulled slowly across the floor. It was so faint that I might have ignored it if Marvin hadn't frozen in the middle of lifting his fork. His eyes flicked to mine, wide and alert. "Did we remember to lock the door?" he asked. Before I could answer, Marvin's dad stood up from the table and went upstairs without a word. He didn't look angry. He didn't look confused. He moved like he was responding to something routine, like this was part of the house now. Marvin's mom glanced down at her watch like she was checking timing. "How about you kids go outside?" she said, too brightly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. Marvin and I pushed back from the table and went out through the back door. Behind the house was something you wouldn't expect if you'd only seen it from the street. It backed up to a ring of woods, thick enough that the yard felt private and cut off from the rest of town. There were trails winding through the trees, little paths that spidered out in different directions. As kids, we used to treat it like a tiny wilderness. We ran, not in a straight line, not like we were racing, more like we were trying to burn off nervous energy. We went down one trail, then cut back, then ran circles until our lungs started to hurt. At one point, I stopped behind Marvin to catch my breath. My chest felt tight, and I suddenly wanted water so badly it was all I could think about. I looked up at the house as I swallowed air. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved across the second-floor windows. Not a normal shadow, like a person walking past a light. This was darker, thicker, and it moved in a strange stagger, like it couldn't walk properly. It crossed one window, vanished behind the wall, then appeared again in the next window, jerking forward in uneven steps. For a second, I could see it clearly, a blank shape of darkness, against the colorful vintage wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. My skin prickled. A hand touched my arm and I nearly jumped out of my body before I realized it was just Marvin. "What the hell, dude?" I snapped, trying to sound like I was mad instead of scared. He flinched like he'd forgotten what personal space was. "Sorry," he said. Then he followed my gaze toward the house. "What are you staring at?" He asked it carefully, like he didn't want the answer. "Nothing," I lied quickly. "Just, I'm thirsty. I want water or something." "There's always the hose," he said. So we drank from the garden hose like kids do, even though there was probably something terrible about the pipes. The water was cold and tasted like metal and dirt in summer, and it was the most refreshing thing I'd ever had in my life. We kept going back for more sips as the sun lowered behind the trees and the world turned blue with twilight. The streetlights came on one by one. Finally, Marvin's mom called us back inside in that sing-song voice adults use when they're trying to sound normal. Marvin looked wiped out, not just sleepy, drained. We went upstairs and got ready for bed. The window was still open, letting in that cool breeze that made the room feel perfect. Cold air on my face, warm radiator heat at my back. We tried to put on a movie, but Marvin couldn't keep his eyes open. He fell asleep around 10:40, mouth slightly open, the kind of sleep that looks heavy and unhealthy. My eyes went to the door. In the dim light from the TV menu screen, I could see the lock was engaged. Thank God, I still didn't understand why it mattered so much, but after the way Marvin had reacted at dinner, I wasn't going to be the idiot who ignored the one rule he seemed to have. Marvin had an ensuite bathroom connected to his room, which was good because I didn't want to step into that hallway in the dark. I laid down on the floor on top of sleeping bags. It was cozy, soft, and familiar, and for a while the hum of the TV menu felt like a lullaby. I drifted off. A sharp noise yanked me out of sleep. Knock, knock. My eyes cracked open. The room was darker now, the TV either off or dimmed so low it was barely lighting anything. The air felt colder. I heard the knock again. Knock, knock. Marvin was standing by the bedroom door. At first, my sleepy brain didn't understand what was wrong. Then I realized his posture was strange. His head was leaned forward, and he was tapping his forehead lightly against the door like he was trying to answer someone's knock by knocking back. "Marvin?" I whispered. He turned toward me. His eyes were shut. His face had dried drool on it. He looked like he wasn't awake at all. A groan crawled up out of his chest, low and rough, like it hurt him to speak. "We let him in," Marvin said. "We let him in." He took a deep breath, like he was about to say something hard, and then his hand moved. He flipped the lock. Click. My blood went cold so fast it felt like my body had been dropped into ice water. You let him in?" Marvin mumbled as if he was accusing me. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt heavy. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. "Marvin, why did you unlock the door?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, trying to sound like this was just sleepwalking, trying to pretend I didn't feel the sudden wrongness in the air. He didn't answer me properly. He let out another guttural sound and shuffled away from the door, dragging his feet back toward his bed like his legs weren't working right. Halfway there, he repeated it again, softer. "We let him in." Then he collapsed onto the mattress and went still, mumbling into his pillow. I sat, frozen, on the sleeping bags. My heart was hammering so loudly I thought it might wake him again. I stared at the door, at the unlocked lock, at the thin line of darkness under the frame. That was when I heard it. Dragging. Not the normal creak of an old house settling. Not footsteps, a slow, wet scrape coming from somewhere down the hallway. Then metal on wood, like something chained was being pulled along the floor. I held my breath. The sound grew closer. Scrape, squish, thud. Scrape, squish, thud. Each step sounded wrong, like whatever was moving wasn't walking the way living things walk. The wet sound made my stomach twist. The metal scrape made my teeth ache. It stopped outside our door. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence so thick it felt like pressure. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound was softer than it should have been, like the knuckles were wrapped in something damp. Marvin's voice came from his bed, half asleep. "Here he is," he mumbled. The door handle began to turn from the other side. It shook, violent and impatient, like the thing outside was excited or angry. Then the latch clicked. The door swung open slowly on creaking hinges. Light spilled into the room, but it wasn't the cold LED light. It was warm, yellow, almost old-fashioned, like an incandescent bulb glowing in the hallway. That alone made me feel dizzy, because I knew Marvin's dad had replaced everything. There shouldn't have been that kind of light in this house anymore. A figure stood in the doorway. It was the shape of a medium-sized adult, but the details didn't make sense. The yellow light behind it flooded around its head and shoulders, and where its eyes should have been, there was brightness, like glowing sockets, like two small headlights aimed into the room. The rest of its face was swallowed by shadow. It stood still for a second, and I had the horrible feeling it was listening. Then it scanned the room. Those bright eyes moved slowly from corner to corner like beams searching a dark road. When they passed over me, my whole body went rigid. I don't know how to explain it except that I felt seen, even though I was barely moving, barely breathing. The light moved on. It landed on Marvin's face. The figure started toward him. As it walked, I heard chains scrape the floor. Not imaginary chains, real metal dragging across wood. Each step left something behind, dark and shiny, like puddles forming where its feet touched down. The smell hit me then, something sour and old, like stagnant water and rust. I couldn't look away. Fear held my eyes open. It didn't seem to know I was there. It moved with that same stagger I'd seen in the window earlier, jerky and uneven, like a puppet with a bad string. It went straight for Marvin. And then, without warning, it stepped on me. Its foot came down hard on my right leg, right on my thigh. A flash of pain exploded through me, white-hot and immediate, so intense it stole my breath. I screamed. The figure froze. Those yellow eyes snapped down toward me, and for the first time I felt its attention lock fully onto me. Not curiosity, not surprise. Recognition. Then it flung itself backward out of the room with a speed that didn't match the way it had been moving. It retreated into the hallway in those same staggered movements, like it was skipping frames, like it wasn't fully present in our world. My scream woke the whole house. Marvin jerked upright, blinking confused, as if he'd been yanked out of a dream. His parents came rushing from their room down the hall, and the hallway light snapped on. Cold LED again. Harsh and real. They found me shaking and crying on the floor. Marvin's mom grabbed me, holding me tight, murmuring that it was okay even though none of us believed it. Marvin's dad's face was pale. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He didn't say, "There's nothing there." He just looked past us into the hallway, as if checking whether the air had changed. That night, Marvin and I slept in his parents' bed. I don't even remember where they slept at all. All I remember is that their room felt different. Not safer in a normal way, but like there was a protective energy there. Like the air was thicker and warmer, like whatever lived in the rest of the house didn't cross that threshold as easily. My legs swelled into a huge bruise by morning, dark and ugly. I stared at it in the bathroom light and tried to convince myself it could have come from something else. Maybe I'd rolled into a chair. Maybe I'd hit the bed frame. Anything. But what I knew was true. I kept the real explanation to myself, mostly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, but also because saying it out loud felt like inviting it to become permanent. Marvin's mom drove me home the next day. She kept one hand tight on the steering wheel like she was holding herself together. She was kind to me, too kind, in a way that felt like an apology. I never stayed the night in that house again. Marvin and I grew apart over the next months. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big argument. We just stopped being close. It's strange how quickly that can happen when you're young. One day, you're inseparable. The next, you're sitting at different lunch tables, talking less and less, pretending you don't notice. Before that school year ended, his parents separated. Marvin moved to another town with his mom. His dad stayed in Denbrook. From what I heard, he lived in that huge house alone for a while, which sounded unbearable to me. Eventually, he sold it to the city's historical society. They decided to turn it into a museum. I haven't seen Marvin in about 6 years. I'm about to graduate high school now, and the museum is finally opening this year. Posters are going up around town. There's a little website with photos and a countdown to the grand opening, like it's some exciting community event. Part of me wants to go in just once. Not because I'm brave, but because I want answers. I want to see if it feels the same. I want to see if that warmth I remembered as a kid was real or if it was always a lie I told myself. But most of me wants to stay far away from that place forever. Because no matter how much time passes, a piece of that figure follows me into my sleep. It shows up in my dreams in fragments. Yellow light where eyes should be, the sound of metal dragging over wood, the wet scrape that makes my stomach twist even when I'm safe in my own bed. I don't think I'll ever understand what it was doing with Marvin, why it wanted in, or why it seemed so familiar to him that he could unlock the door while asleep and speak like he was repeating something he'd been told 100 times. All I know is I'll never forget why there's a permanent patch of discoloration on my right thigh, the kind that never fully faded no matter how many years went by. Online, there's a photo of Marvin and his dad posted for the museum's grand opening. Marvin looks older, of course, but he still has that boyish charm in his face that makes people trust him at first glance. His dad stands beside him, smiling like a man trying to prove he's okay. But their eyes are what I notice. Marvin still has those dark bags under them, like exhaustion stained into his skin. Behind his practiced smile, I can see the toll of living in that house, of carrying something he couldn't talk about. And his dad wears the same look now, too. Like whatever was in that house didn't just haunt the rooms. Story 2. I'm not going to pretend I'm a good person. I know what I am, and I've known for a long time. When you spend most of your life alone in a dark room doing things you'd never admit to anyone, there's a kind of honesty that eventually shows up whether you want it to or not. At first, you build excuses. You call it curiosity. You call it research. You tell yourself you're learning a skill. You say you're not hurting anyone because you're not touching anything. You're just watching. Then one day, the excuses stop working. They don't even sound real inside your own head. And you're left staring at the simple truth of what you do. I hack cameras, nanny cams, baby monitors, IP cameras, home security systems, cheap little webcams people buy online and stick on a shelf to watch their dog while they're at work. Indoor cameras couples mount in their living rooms and bedrooms because they've seen one too many stories about break-ins, and they like the feeling of control. They like being able to pull up a feed on their phone and see their front door, their kitchen, their hallway, their bed, their baby's crib. They set all of it up, and then they don't secure it. They leave the default password. They don't update the firmware. They don't understand what it means when the app asks about remote access. They forward a port because some tutorial told them to. Or the device does it automatically. The feed ends up exposed, sitting out there in the open, waiting for anyone who knows where to look. Most people think a locked front door means the house is locked. They don't realize they've left a window wide open. I've been doing it for 6 years. For the first 2 years, I told myself it was just technical practice, a hobby, a test of my abilities. I'd scan an IP range, find something unsecured, prove I could get in, and then leave. That was the story I repeated in my head, because it sounded clean, because it let me feel like I was doing something smart instead of something ugly. But even when I still said that, I stayed longer than I needed to. And eventually, I stopped pretending. I stopped giving myself speeches. I just did it because I could, because I wanted to, and because by then it had become part of the shape of my nights. I could call that honesty, I guess. It wasn't the kind that makes you better. It was the kind that just removes the mask. My setup wasn't anything special. A decent laptop, a second monitor, a handful of scanning tools I'd adjusted and tuned over the years until the whole process was quick and almost automatic. If an IP range was cooperative, I could find an unsecured feed in under 4 minutes, sometimes faster. Most nights I'd have 3 or 4 streams running at once, tiled across my second monitor like little windows into other people's lives. I'd do other things while they played. I'd eat, I'd scroll, I'd read, I'd work, and I'd glance over whenever something moved. If I'm going to be honest, I should be honest about what I watched, not in graphic detail. I'm not writing this for that. But I watched people living, people cooking and arguing and laughing, people folding laundry, people walking around in socks, half awake, people sleeping with their mouths open, their faces slack in a way you never see in public, people having private conversations they'd be sick to know anyone else heard, people doing things they wouldn't even tell their closest friends. The strange thing is, the more normal it is, the more it gets to you. The intimacy of people who truly believe they're alone has a different quality than anything else. It's not the same as social media, where everyone is performing. It's not even like real life, where people still keep a part of themselves guarded. This is raw, unfiltered, the real version. And it's addictive in a way I still can't fully explain. I'm not proud of it. I'm also not going to claim I stopped before the worst part happened. I didn't. It was a Tuesday in November, around 11 at night. I'd been scanning for about an hour, and I was bored. I'd pulled up a few feeds, but nothing held my attention. One was an empty living room with a TV glow flickering off screen. One was a dark kitchen. One was a cat sleeping on a radiator, its little sides rising and falling in a slow rhythm. I stared at that one longer than I should have, just because it felt harmless. Eventually, I almost closed the laptop. Almost. Instead, I ran one more sweep on a range I hadn't tried before. The results suggested it was a residential area about 40 minutes from where I lived. That meant nothing, really. Feeds could be anywhere. But something in me still liked the idea of closeness, of watching people who were technically within driving distance, as if that made it more real. One result came back. I clicked it. The feed was dark, darker than most. The camera's low light was bad, turning everything into grainy gray shapes and thick shadows. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. It was a room, big, high ceiling, mostly empty. The camera was mounted high in a corner, wide angle catching most of the space. The walls looked bare. The floor looked like concrete or old wood, hard to tell with the image quality. In the center of the room was a chair, and in the chair was a person. I leaned toward the screen without thinking. The figure was sitting upright, facing the camera straight on. Completely still, not the kind of still you see when someone is asleep in a chair. Not even the stillness of someone trying to sit quietly. It was like the feed had frozen, except the grain shifted, and the image noise moved the way it does on a live camera. I watched for a full minute. No shift of breathing, no small adjustments, no scratch of the nose, nothing. Just a person sitting in a chair in an empty room, facing a camera in the dark. My first thought was that it wasn't a person at all. Maybe it was a mannequin. Maybe it was some kind of prop, shoved into a storage space. Maybe it was an art thing, someone trying to be weird on purpose. People do that. They set up cameras and stage things. They want attention. Or they want to scare someone. I was already building explanations when the figure moved. Its head tilted. Slow. Careful. Like someone angling their ear toward a faint sound. Like someone trying to listen. I told myself, okay, it's a person. Just a person sitting in the dark. Strange, but not impossible. I'd watched enough feeds to know people do stranger things than sitting in a chair in a dark room for no obvious reason. And they do it because they believe nobody is watching. I kept watching. For the first 10 minutes, nothing big happened. The figure stayed in the chair. Every now and then, the head shifted a few degrees, tiny adjustments, always keeping its face aimed toward the camera. It never looked away. That started to bother me. A normal person, even if they were sitting there on purpose, would look around. They'd check something. They'd glance at the corners of the room. They'd get distracted. They'd pick up their phone. They'd stand up and stretch. They'd do anything that made them feel human. This one just kept looking at the camera. I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself the stream might be looping. Maybe it was a recording stuck on repeat. Maybe the camera had a glitch that made it look like it wasn't updating correctly. Maybe I was watching the same few seconds over and over. Still, I didn't close it. I got a packet of crackers from my desk drawer, the kind you can eat without thinking, and I sat there with crumbs on my fingers watching a person sit in a chair in an empty room. At the 11-minute mark, the figure stood up. It rose slowly, unfolding from the chair in a way that made my stomach tighten before my brain could explain why. At first, it just looked like someone standing. Then, as it straightened, I felt the wrongness more clearly. It was too tall, not so tall it looked like a cartoon monster. Not stretched like bad CGI, just slightly wrong, like something that almost passes as human, but misses by a small margin. The proportions didn't line up the way they should. The torso felt a little too long, or the limbs did. I can't even say exactly which part was wrong. It was the overall geometry of it, the shape of it. It stood facing the camera, not moving, like it was giving me time to really take it in. Then it walked toward the camera. Not rushing, not stomping, not creeping like a horror movie, just steady steps, calm and even, crossing the room toward the corner where the camera was mounted. As it got closer, the image got worse. The low light struggled, the grain thickened, and the figure became harder to read. The closer it came, the more the wide-angle lens started to warp the edges. It stopped near the camera right at the point where the lens would start to distort its shape. And then it looked up. Not in the casual way someone looks up at a camera to check if it's still working. Not in the irritated way someone looks when they realize they're being recorded. It looked up directly into the camera, directly into the lens. I've watched hundreds of feeds. I've seen people notice their cameras. I've seen people adjust them, wave at them, test them. I know what it looks like when someone is aware of a camera in the room. This wasn't that. The angle of its gaze wasn't the angle of someone looking at an object on a wall. It was the angle of someone looking through that object, as if the camera wasn't the point. As if the camera was a doorway, and the thing on the other side was what mattered. The thing it was trying to see was me. I closed the feed, not gracefully. I clicked out of it fast, hands suddenly clumsy. The stream disappeared and my desktop filled the screen, bright icons and normal colors, like a sudden reminder of reality. I sat back in my chair and realized my heart was beating in a way I didn't like. Not just fast, uneven, like it was trying to climb out of my chest. I got up and drank water. I stood there in my little kitchen area, staring at my sink as if it could give me answers. I told myself what I always tell myself when I'm unsettled, that the brain looks for patterns, that it creates faces from noise, that it assigns intention to random movement, that there was a normal explanation for what I'd seen. I believed maybe 40% of it. Curiosity pulled harder than fear, or maybe pride did, the part of me that hated the idea of being chased off by a weird feed. After a few minutes, I sat back down and reopened the stream. The room was empty. The chair was there, in the center. The walls were the same. The shadows were the same. No figure, no movement, nothing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I almost laughed at myself. That's what I wanted it to be. Nothing. A glitch. A person who'd walked out of frame. Something that made me feel stupid for getting scared. Then I noticed the timestamp. It had the right date and the right hour. But the minute counter wasn't moving. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I watched the numbers in the corner. The seconds ticked forward normally. 12, 13, 14. The little digital clock in the feed looked clean and clear, like it was being overlaid by the camera's software. But the minutes stayed frozen. I kept staring. The seconds hit 60 and kept going. 63 seconds, 70, 90, that should be impossible. Even cheap cameras don't count seconds like that. They roll over. They always roll over. I checked my system clock. It was fine. I checked the time on my phone. Fine. My internet connection. Fine. I looked back at the feed. The figure was sitting in the chair again. I hadn't seen it enter. I hadn't looked away. There wasn't even a blink of darkness or buffering. One moment the chair was empty. The next moment it was occupied, like the person had been dropped into the frame. It was facing the camera. And then, slowly, with that same deliberate patience, it raised one hand. And it waved. Not a quick hello, not casual, just a slow wave like it knew exactly what it was doing and exactly who it was doing it to. I slammed the laptop shut, not just closing the feed, closing the whole machine. Like that could shut the door. I shoved it to the far side of my desk, farther than it needed to be, as if distance mattered. I sat with my hands flat on the tabletop and forced myself to breathe. Then I did something I almost never do. I went to bed. I turned off the lights, then turned them back on, then off again, then on again. I finally left the lamp on and lay there staring at the ceiling. I listened to the building settling, the faint sounds in the walls, a car passing outside, a neighbor's footsteps in the hallway. Every normal noise sounded louder because my brain was trying to decide which ones belonged and which ones didn't. I told myself again and again, a person, a strange person in their own home, a camera with a broken timestamp, a loop, compression artifacts, coincidences lining up in a way that looked meaningful because I wanted it to. I reminded myself that I was not, by any fair measure, a person with healthy habits. I spent my nights spying on strangers. I was always tired, always overstimulated, always sitting in the dark. If anyone's brain was going to turn weird shadows into monsters, it would be mine. I almost convinced myself. Then my phone buzzed. A notification lit the screen. It was from the camera app I used to monitor feeds remotely. The app had a motion alert feature, and it would push a notification when movement was detected on a feed you had saved or linked. The notification said, "Motion detected," and below that, a preview thumbnail image. My bedroom. From above. Wide angle. The angle was wrong in a way that made my stomach go cold. It was the view from a camera mounted high up, like in the top corner of the room. It showed my bed. It showed the blanket. It showed the edge of the dresser. It showed me lying there. I sat up so fast the sheet tangled around my legs. I turned and looked at the corners of my bedroom, as if the camera would be obvious now that I knew it was there, like it would be blinking a little red light, admitting what it was. There was nothing, no device, no lens, no shiny dot catching the lamplight, no small black square mounted near the ceiling. My phone buzzed again like it was impatient, like it wanted me to tap. I didn't. I stared at the notification until the screen dimmed. Then I tapped it awake again, not opening it, just making sure it was real. It was still there. The thumbnail stayed the same. I realized something that made the fear turn sharp. I hadn't bookmarked that feed. I hadn't saved it. I hadn't added it to the app. I'd opened it raw directly from a scan, the way you do when you're just checking what's there. I'd closed it. I'd shut the laptop. I'd never linked it to anything. And yet the app was acting like it belonged to me, like it was one of my cameras, like it had been added on purpose. I didn't open the notification. I didn't click anything. I didn't swipe it away. I turned the phone face down on the mattress like it was something that might burn me through the glass. That was 11 days ago. I haven't touched the laptop since. It's still on my desk exactly where I left it, closed and silent, like a sleeping animal. I've been sleeping with the lights on, which helps with some things and makes other things worse. Light keeps the corners from getting too deep, but it also makes it harder to pretend there isn't something in the room with you. In the dark, you can tell yourself you can't see because it's dark. In the light, you know you're not seeing because there's nothing there. The notification is still on my phone. Unread. A small red badge that never goes away. Every time I pick up my phone, it's there, waiting like an unblinking eye. I think about deleting the app almost every day. I even go to the home screen and hover over it, thumb ready. But I can't make myself do it. I'm not sure what I'm afraid of. Part of me is afraid of what I'll see if I open the notification. It might show the live feed, and I might see something standing over my bed too close to the lens to understand. Or I might see myself sleeping from an angle that proves, without question, that there's a camera in my room. But there's another fear underneath that. One, a fear that doesn't make sense and still feels true. I'm afraid that whatever was on that original feed has been watching me for 11 nights already, through a camera I can't find. And that opening the notification won't change that. It'll just prove it. And I'm afraid that if I delete the app, something will notice. That sounds ridiculous when I write it out. Apps don't have feelings. Cameras don't get offended. The internet doesn't care about you. That's the kind of logic I use to hide behind, the kind that made me feel safe and clever. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in this the way I used to be, that I'm not the only one looking. I've gone through my apartment 3 times searching for a camera. I checked every corner of the ceiling. I stood on a chair and looked at the smoke detector, turning it in my hands, checking for anything that looked new or out of place. I checked the vents. I checked the bookshelf. I checked the router and every little device plugged into the wall. I looked behind picture frames. I checked for pinholes, for strange reflections, for the tiny dark circle of a lens. Nothing I could find. I even tried the obvious tech tricks. I turned off all the lights and used my phone camera to scan for infrared dots. I walked slowly, panning the room like a ghost hunter. I found the usual reflections off glass and shiny plastic. I found nothing that looked like a hidden night vision camera. Still, the notification stays, and that's the part that keeps me awake. That's the part that gets me out of bed at 3 a.m. to stand at the window and look down at the street, like I can spot the answer in the headlights passing by. I watch people walking their dogs, and late-night drivers, and the occasional drunk couple stumbling home. And I wonder if any of them know how thin privacy really is, how easy it is to reach into someone's home without ever stepping through the door. For 6 years, I watched people who didn't know I was there. I was very good at it. I knew exactly what it looked like when someone was being observed without their knowledge. You can see it in the way they relax, in the way they let their face drop, in the way they stop performing, in the way they scratch an itch without worrying how it looks, in the way they talk to their kids or their partner in a voice they'd never use in public. I knew that look. Now I know the other side of it too. I know what it feels like when the air in your room seems wrong, like there's a tension on you. When you catch yourself turning your head for no reason, listening for a sound that never comes. When you go quiet on the phone because you suddenly feel embarrassed, not because someone is in the room, but because you can't prove they aren't. It's humiliating in a deep way, and it should be. It's the kind of humiliation that feels like punishment, like the world correcting itself. I'm posting this for 2 reasons. 1, I need to put it somewhere outside my head. I need to make it real in words, because keeping it inside makes it grow. 2, I want someone else to know just in case I wake up tomorrow and the notification is still there, and then one day it isn't because I'm not. If you have a camera in your house and you haven't checked it recently, check it. Check your password. Check that you changed it from the default. Check your firmware updates. Check your port settings. Check whether the camera is accessible from outside your network. Check whether your account has unknown logins. If your camera app has a list of devices, make sure every device on that list is yours. And if everything looks fine, if all your settings are right, and your password is strong and there's no reason to think anyone can get into your feed, check again, because I was very good at what I did, and someone was better. Story 3. The house sat on a wide hill about 3 miles outside town, far enough that you couldn't see it unless you knew where to look. It was one of those places people talked about more than they ever visited. When we were kids, The house was basically a dare that never ended. Somebody's cousin claimed they went inside and came back. Somebody else swore they heard screaming from the hill at night. A few kids said they saw lights moving behind the walls, even though everyone also claimed the place had been empty for decades. None of those stories ever sounded fully real. Not because they weren't scary, but because, no one could ever name a day, a time, a clear detail. It was always, my friend said, or my brother saw. The house stayed a rumor with a front door. That was part of why Mary and I decided to go. It was summer break, the kind where the days are long and you start doing dumb things just to prove you're alive. We were bored in the way only teenagers can be bored, like the world owed us entertainment and refused to pay. We'd spent the last week circling the same places in town, eating the same cheap food, complaining about the heat, and talking about the house like it was an attraction at an amusement park. One afternoon, Mary said, "Let's just go. Today, right now." I pretended to think about it like I was weighing options, but the truth is I was already halfway convinced. I hated the idea of being the kid who talked big and never did anything. Mary was fearless in a way that made you either follow her or feel small. I didn't want to feel small. So we went. The hill started at the edge of overgrown land where the town kind of gave up. The grass wasn't trimmed, the brush wasn't cleared, and the path up looked like it had been forgotten for years. I liked being outside, sure, but I didn't like the way the slope forced your feet to land wrong. I'd sprained my ankle before, and it scared me more than any ghost story. On top of that, South Carolina summers didn't play fair. The heat didn't sit on you. It pressed down like a hand. At the bottom of the hill, we slowed down and stared up. The weeds were thick. Bushes pushed into the narrow trail like they were trying to close it off. There were thorns everywhere, the kind you don't notice until you're home picking them out of your skin. Mosquitoes hovered in clouds, and the air had that wet, green smell that means something is rotting under the leaves. I remember thinking, this is already not worth it. Mary didn't slow down. She pushed ahead, stepping over roots, parting branches with her forearms like she'd done it 100 times. I followed, trying not to complain, trying not to show how much I hated the feeling of bugs landing on my legs because I'd worn shorts like an idiot. A few minutes in, we found what looked like an entrance marker. Not a gate, not a fence, just an old wooden sign stuck into the ground, tilted like it had been punched and never fully recovered. The wood was so weathered it looked gray, like driftwood. It had the vibe of something that had survived storms, time, and neglect through sheer stubbornness. Carved into it were words painted in red, all caps, sharp and messy, like they'd been written by someone angry or excited. "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." I wiped sweat off my forehead and stared at it too long. Something about those words made my stomach tighten. "The Inferno," I said without thinking. Mary turned her head. "What? When Dante and Virgil go into hell, the entrance has that inscription," I said. I was trying to sound casual, like I wasn't affected, but my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Mary snorted. Some weirdo did that to mess with people. "It's just a scare sign." I nodded like I agreed because I wanted to agree, but I didn't like that someone had bothered to carve it at all. It wasn't the normal warning. It wasn't keep out or private property. It was the kind of message you leave when you want a person to feel like they're stepping into something they can't undo. We kept walking. The climb was worse than I expected. It wasn't just steep. It felt longer than it should. At first, it was just a narrow dirt track through thick brush. Then, without me noticing the exact moment it changed, the brush became trees. Real trees. Tall ones. The kind that make the light dim and the air cooler, even in the middle of the day. It was strange because I hadn't thought there were woods up here. I'd heard hill, not forest. But suddenly we were walking between trunks and the undergrowth was heavy and the path felt like it was swallowing sound. We got quiet without meaning to. Every now and then Mary looked back at me like she was checking if I was still there. She wasn't scared, not yet. But the way she kept checking made me feel like she'd noticed something too, something she didn't want to say out loud. After what felt like forever, the trees ended all at once, not gradually, not thinning out the way they normally do. It was like we stepped through a curtain. We reached a clearing. And in the middle of it was the house. My arms prickled immediately. The hair stood up like my skin had decided on its own that we were in danger. The house itself looked normal at first glance. Not a mansion, not a shack, just a plain old house like you'd see in town. Porch, roofline, the shape of an ordinary family place. But it had no windows. Not boarded up windows, not broken windows, no windows at all. Just a front door under the porch roof, like the entire house had been built around that one entrance. The clearing was also wrong. It was too clean. The grass was green and even, like a yard that got mowed. But there were no trees near it, no bushes, no vines creeping toward the walls. It looked like something had been placed there and the land around it had been cleared on purpose. Like the house didn't belong in nature, and nature had been forced to make space. I said something to Mary about the clearing, how it didn't make sense. She didn't even pause. "It's just a house," she said, glancing at me like I was embarrassing her. "Don't be a baby. Come on." Then she ran across the grass, and for half a second the moment felt normal, like we were kids in any field on any day. My fear dipped enough for me to chase her. By the time we reached the porch, we were both breathing hard. The hike had drained us more than we'd admitted. Mary looked at the door like it was a game. Then she nodded at me. "Knock," she said. I did. The sound of my knuckles on the door felt too loud, like the house was built to amplify it. Then there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no creak inside. Just silence so complete it felt like it had weight. Mary shrugged, like the silence meant she'd won some argument. She reached out and pulled the door open. I expected resistance, like it would be stuck or locked. It wasn't. It swung inward smoothly, as if it had been oiled yesterday. We stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was that the inside did have windows, big ones, tall, expensive-looking windows that belonged in a rich home. They were set into the walls like they'd always been there. But they didn't show the outside. Instead of trees or the clearing or even light, they showed a flat, pale blue, like a screen that hadn't loaded. It reminded me of a video game glitch, like the world outside hadn't rendered. We stood at the start of a hallway with green walls. On the left was a wide opening into a dining room. On the right was an opening into a living room. At the end of the hallway was another door. The hallway itself was empty, like it was waiting for us to decide where to go. The dining room was light blue, almost cheerful, with a long table laid out as if guests were coming. Plates, glasses, the kind of setting you'd do for a holiday meal. The living room, in contrast, was deep red, dark and heavy. It looked expensive. Victorian-style furniture, bookshelves, paintings, a fireplace with a real roaring fire. It didn't feel like an abandoned room. It felt occupied, warm, maintained. Mary looked around and gave a small laugh. "Well," she said, "we didn't get eaten by a witch." I tried to laugh too, but my throat was tight. The dining room bothered me most because it was too normal. Abandoned places aren't set for dinner. Abandoned places collect dust and spider webs. They don't keep plates clean and glasses upright like someone's about to pour sweet tea. "There are plates and glasses for guests," I said quietly, pointing. "I don't like this. Nobody's here. Yet." We went into the living room next. The fire crackled. The furniture looked like it had never been sat on, but it was positioned perfectly, like a picture in a magazine. The shelves were full of old books, real ones with worn spines and thick pages. I pulled one out and saw old classics, the kind you read in school and pretend you understand. Above the fireplace was a large painting that caught me the way a face catches you in a crowd. It was a close-up portrait of an aristocratic-looking man painted so realistically it felt like he might blink. Black hair cut short, Mutton chops, but no beard. A formal uniform. One hand tucked into his pocket like Napoleon in those famous poses. His expression was calm, controlled, almost kind. Great painting, I said. Mary made a face. Dork. Then she dropped into a recliner like she belonged there, leaning back and stretching her legs out, enjoying the comfort. The sight of her relaxing in that room made me feel briefly safer. If she could sit like that, maybe I was overreacting. I sat down too, more for my legs than for my nerves. My calves ached from the climb. After a minute, I said, "Shouldn't we check the door at the end of the hall?" "Let's go." We walked back into the green hallway and reached the door. Mary didn't hesitate. She opened it and stepped through. I followed. The next space was the same hallway, same green walls, same layout, openings to a dining room and a living room, another door at the end. I stopped, confused, and looked back. The door we'd come through was closed now. I grabbed the handle and turned it. It didn't move. I tried again. Harder. Nothing. It might as well have been painted onto the door. I was strong back then. I played sports. I could force a stuck lock or break a cheap latch. This wasn't that. This was solid, unmoving, like the house had decided that door didn't open anymore. "Mary," I said. She turned, and the look on her face told me she'd already tried too. The bravado was gone. Her eyes were wide and her mouth had gone tight. "I don't like this, John," she whispered. "I don't either," I said. I backed up and slammed my shoulder into the door like I was tackling someone. The impact jolted through my bones, and the door didn't even shake. It was like hitting a concrete wall. I stepped back, breathing hard. "Maybe we keep going," I said, and I hated how weak it sounded. But we didn't have choices, only directions. Mary nodded, swallowing. "Yeah, maybe the next door leads out." We walked down the hallway and opened the door at the end. The moment we stepped through, the door behind us slammed shut. Mary spun around, furious. "John, you idiot," she snapped, voice sharp with panic. "That was not funny. It wasn't me," I said, immediately. "Mary, I swear." She stared at me like she wanted to believe me but couldn't afford to. "Swear it." "I swear," I said. "I wouldn't do that." I grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. I shoulder-checked it again, and the pain shot through me. Mary looked toward the windows in the living room. "We can break them?" "With what?" I said. "Our hands? You want to bleed out?" She marched to the fireplace, grabbed a metal poker, and shoved it into my hands. "Here." I went to the window and swung as hard as I could. The metal hit the glass with a dull thud. No crack. No spiderweb pattern. Nothing. It felt like I'd hit brick, and the impact made my wrist sting. I dropped the poker, swore under my breath, then grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window with everything I had. The chair bounced off and fell onto the carpet like the window was made of steel. The sound of the chair hitting the floor was the only noise. The silence after it was worse, like the house was listening. "How do we get out?" I yelled, louder than I meant to. Fear does that. Doors don't work. Windows don't work. "What do we do?" She just shook her head slightly. "I don't know." We stood there for a moment, breathing hard. My watch, the cheap one I wore every day, was frozen on the exact time we'd walked in. I tapped it, shook my wrist. Nothing. I rubbed my forehead like I could push the panic back into my skull. "Maybe we just keep going," I said more quietly. "Maybe it ends eventually." Mary nodded like she had no other option. "Yeah, we keep moving." We opened the next door. Another hallway, another dining room, another living room. Same windows showing that flat, empty blue. Another door waiting at the end like a punchline. The door behind us closed and locked, slow and steady this time, like it was doing it on purpose. Mary said, "We should look around, see if anything's different." It was all the same. The food wasn't rotting. The fire was always burning. The air smelled like clean wood and old paper. We went through another door. Same thing. Then another. The repetition started to mess with my head. The halls were identical down to the smallest detail, but my body was getting more tired, and my skin felt colder despite the fireplaces. At some point, I stopped counting. Each time the door closed behind us, it sounded like a lock clicking into place. "How long have we been here?" I asked, and the question came out like a plea. Mary looked at my watch, and then at hers. Hers had stopped too. She swallowed. "Don't think about time," she said. "Just think about leaving." We opened another door. This time, when I stepped into the living room, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The painting above the fireplace, the aristocratic man, was still there, but his expression had changed. He was frowning. "Mary," I said quickly, voice shaking. I hurried across the room, pointing up. "He's frowning now. Look." Mary stared, and the fear on her face shifted into something else for a moment. Hope, maybe, or relief, like a change meant we weren't trapped in an endless loop. "Good," she said, forcing confidence. "That means something is happening. Maybe we're getting somewhere." We moved on, almost eager now, like we'd found a trail marker. Next hall, next living room. The man in the painting was smiling. Not big, not scary yet, just a small content smile, like someone who'd gotten good news. It made my skin crawl anyway, because I knew, deep down, that paintings aren't supposed to change. Mary whispered, "At least it's progress." Next room. The smile was wider now. A grin. It looked wrong on his face, like it belonged to someone else. Next hall. The grin stretched further, turning into something sharp and hungry. His eyes looked brighter, almost alive, and the expression wasn't happy anymore. It was pleased in a cruel way, like he enjoyed watching something struggle. "I don't like his face," Mary said, voice small. "I know," I said. Next hall, the painting was still there, but the man was gone. Only the background remained, a parlor behind where he had been standing, empty now, like he'd stepped out of the frame. Mary stared at it too long. I tried to sound brave. "Still progress," I said, but my voice didn't believe it. We went to the door at the end of that hallway. Mary put her hand on the knob. Before she could turn it, the air shifted, not like a breeze, like pressure, like something on the other side had inhaled. She opened the door. Wind hit us immediately, hard, like the house had exhaled back. We stumbled forward and were pushed into the room beyond. The door slammed shut behind us, and instinct made me grab the handle. Locked. The room was different. It wasn't another hallway. It was a study lit by candlelight, the kind you'd see in an old movie. Tall shelves, stacks of books, papers scattered across the floor and desk like someone had been working for days without sleep. The smell was wax and old leather and dust. And there was a man sitting at the desk, writing. He lifted his head like he'd been expecting us, and for a second my brain tried to treat him like a normal person. He looked exactly like the man in the painting, only now he was real, in flesh, wearing clothing that belonged to another century. He smiled at us, a calm, welcoming expression that should have been comforting. "It wasn't Mary and John," he said, setting down his pen with care, like he had all the time in the world. "I've been expecting you." His accent was clean and sharp, something like old New England money, the kind you heard on TV when politicians talked. It felt wrong in that room, wrong on that hill, wrong in the middle of nowhere. He stood up, and I noticed he had a cane. He hadn't looked old enough to need it, which made it feel like the cane was for style, not support. "I assume your walk was unpleasant," he said smoothly, like he was hosting guests who'd arrived late. "So I'll ask politely, what are you doing in my house?" "Your house," Mary said, stiff. "This place is abandoned." He gave a quiet laugh. "Then the records are mistaken. This is mine. Surely you've noticed, like it meant claimed." He took a few steps closer, and even though he wasn't threatening us physically, everything in me wanted to move back. The room felt smaller the closer he got, like the air was thickening. "You've come a long way," he said. "Why? We were bored, I said. The words sounded ridiculous out loud. His reaction was immediate. He laughed, loud and genuine, the laugh of someone amused by a joke only he understood. Bored, he repeated, tasting the word. I've met countless people. They come to me with need, with hunger, with desperation. But boredom, that's new. He tapped his cane lightly on the floor, once, as if to mark the moment. Well, he said, since you're here, what do you want? To leave, Mary said, blunt, voice shaking. His expression dipped into mild disappointment. Leave? You climbed that hill, entered my home, and you want to leave immediately. That would be a waste. He studied us in silence for a beat too long, and in that silence his face went strangely blank, like a mask with the emotion taken off. His eyes didn't change, didn't soften, didn't blink in a normal way. It felt like being looked at by something that wasn't alive. Then the smile returned. Do you even know who I am? He asked. No, I said. He blinked, then laughed again, almost delighted. Of course. I should introduce myself. My manners have slipped. He straightened, one hand resting on his cane. I am Satan, he said, as calmly as if he were saying his name at a dinner party. The fallen angel, the one your churches warn you about. Mary made a harsh sound. That's crap. You're messing with us. He looked at her, not angry, just patient. Then he snapped his fingers. A fireplace, I hadn't noticed, cold and empty a moment before, burst into flame. Not slowly, not with kindling. It was just there, roaring, like it had always been burning. Mary froze. He nodded as if he'd proven a simple point. I assure you, he said, I'm not. He moved away from the desk, pacing lightly as if he enjoyed the sound of his own footsteps. People seek me out, he continued. They come for deals, love, money, revenge, relief. And yes, they offer things in return. I swallowed hard. Their souls? He smiled, almost kindly. Sometimes, but that's a popular story more than it's a rule. I don't crave souls the way you've been taught to believe. He lifted a finger, unless someone wants something extraordinary. Then I may ask for one. He stopped in front of us. I make reasonable deals, he said softly. I always deliver what's requested, and I always get what I want. The candles flickered like they were responding to his words. My mouth went dry. He looked at us again with that empty, blank stare between sentences, and it made me feel like my thoughts were too loud, like he could hear everything in my head. But, he said, returning to the pleasant tone, I've explained myself. Now you tell me, what do you want in life? What do you seek? I'm not making a deal with you. Are you sure? He asked, and his voice had a gentle curiosity that frightened me more than yelling would have. He walked in a slow circle in front of us, cane in hand, like a teacher moving between desks. You, John, he said, and my stomach dropped at the way he said my name. You want peace at home. Mary's head snapped toward me, confused, but I couldn't look at her. My body had gone cold, and the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. Satan's smile spread, and it wasn't kind anymore. I'd seen that smile before, not on people, but on hunters, right before they did something they didn't need to do but wanted to do. The thrill wasn't in survival, it was in control. John, Mary whispered, what is he talking about? Satan tapped his cane on the floor again. The bottles, he said pleasantly, like he was reading from a book. The shouting, your mother crying, the smoke that settles into everything, the smell of alcohol on your father's breath. I felt sick. I hadn't told anyone the full truth. Not Mary, not friends, nobody. I'd worked hard to keep it hidden because being a teenage boy in a small town meant you swallowed your pain and acted fine. Satan watched my face like he was enjoying a show. It must be unbearable, he said. And you can't fix it. You're 16. You have years left of it. Years. Even the fire sounded quieter. Then he continued, voice smooth again. But I could change it, he said. with a snap of my fingers, your father becomes different. He becomes the man you needed. Your home becomes quiet. Your mother smiles again. Your sisters feel safe. You grow up without flinching at footsteps. My throat tightened so much it hurt. He leaned slightly on his cane, studying me like he was sure of the outcome. I'm not asking for your soul, he added, almost generous. Not for this. Just a favor. Later. In the future. A favor, I whispered. Mary grabbed my arm hard. John, she hissed, shaking me like she could wake me up. Don't do this. Have you never seen a movie in your life? Satan turned his attention to her, amused rather than offended. Mary, he said, as if he'd been waiting for his turn with her. I understand you too. Her grip loosened slightly, not because she trusted him, but because hearing her name in his mouth did something to her. It made her still. This town, he said, this small place that laughs at you and pushes you into corners. Your parents who don't see you. Your peers who treat you like you're a joke. You want to leave, don't you? You want to take John and go somewhere bigger, somewhere that doesn't chew you up for being yourself. Mary's eyes widened, and I felt her fingers slip off my arm. Satan nodded, gentle. I could give you freedom, he said. I could make it easy. College. Success. A life where you're not fighting every day. A life with peace. Mary stared at him like she was trying not to listen and failing. All you have to do, he said softly, is shake my hand. Promise to do a favor for me someday. That's all. Mary looked at me, and in that look I felt everything we'd never said out loud. We were kids, but we weren't stupid. We knew deals like this didn't come without teeth. We also knew what we were being offered wasn't money or fame. It was relief, safety, the end of pain. I swallowed. What kind of favor? I asked. Satan shrugged like it was nothing worth naming. A small one, he said. When the time comes, I'll ask. Not before. You'll have your reward first. Then I'll collect. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. A part of me screamed, not to do it. Another part of me pictured my father sober, smiling, acting like a normal dad. I pictured my mother laughing without fear. I pictured Mary not being swallowed by this town. Mary gave me the smallest nod. I heard myself speak, like the words were coming from someplace outside me. Fine, I said. Deal. Satan's face lit up with joy that looked almost human, and that somehow made it worse. He extended his hand. Then shake, he said. Mary and I stepped forward, and we shook hands with the devil. His hand was warm, dry, firm, normal. That detail stuck with me because it made everything harder to explain later. We let go. His smile settled into something calm again, like business had been completed. He snapped his fingers. The door behind you now leads outside, he said. The changes you asked for are already in motion. When the day comes, I'll return for my favor. Farewell. He nodded once, then turned back to his desk like we were no longer interesting. He picked up his pen and started writing again, as if we were just another line in a long list. Mary and I stood there, stunned, not moving until the fear forced motion into our legs. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her to the door. I yanked it open. Sunlight spilled in, real sunlight, bright and hot. We ran out onto the porch, into the clearing, and I slammed the front door behind us so hard it rattled. We were outside the house on the hill, breathing like we'd been underwater. We didn't talk much on the way down. We just moved, fast, tripping over roots and tearing through brush, driven by the need to get away. When we reached town, we went straight to Mary's place. Her family was kinder than mine, and we needed a safe room, a door that actually opened when you turned the knob. In her bedroom, the adrenaline finally broke, and she kissed me like she was trying to prove we were still real. I stayed the night because neither of us wanted to be alone. The next morning, I went home. My family was in the living room, crying. My father's face looked different. like it had been scrubbed clean of something ugly. He stood up when he saw me, and the expression on him wasn't rage or irritation. It was shame. He apologized, not a half apology, not a sorry you feel that way, a real apology, shaking and raw like he couldn't believe what he'd done. He hugged me, and I stood stiff at first because I didn't trust it. But then he started sobbing, and I realized he meant it. Life changed, exactly like Satan promised. Mary and I finished high school, got into college, and married while we were still there. My dad stayed sober. He started working with charity groups and became the kind of man people respected for the right reasons. Holidays became loud in a happy way, not a dangerous way. Mary didn't end up acting like she used to talk about, but she became a biology teacher, then a professor. I went into computers. We built a life that felt almost unfairly good. After college, we bought a house. Mary got an inheritance from a relative, enough to make everything easier. We had children, 5, Paul, Charlotte, Noah, Lucas, and Ava. The house was always full, the kind of full you don't want to escape from. The kind of full you pray you never lose. Years passed, and the memory of the hill became something we tried not to touch. We never told anyone, not our parents, not our friends, not even our kids. It felt like saying it out loud would make it come back. Still, sometimes at night, I would wake up with that phrase in my head, abandon hope. Yesterday evening, we were eating dinner. The kids were talking over each other, arguing about something small, laughing, asking for seconds. I remember looking at them and feeling a heavy gratitude so strong it almost hurt. Mary caught my eye and smiled. Normal life. Real life, the kind we'd been given. Then the doorbell rang. Mary and I both paused. It was late for visitors, but not impossible. I told her I'd get it. As I walked past the table, I ruffled Ava's hair, and she scrunched her face at me like I was annoying her on purpose. I went to the front door and opened it. A man stood on my porch. He was dressed neatly, like someone who belonged anywhere. He looked familiar in the way a nightmare looks familiar. You don't recognize it at first, then you do, and your body reacts before your mind catches up. He smiled. It was wide, teeth showing, eyes bright with a wild kind of joy. Not joy at seeing me, but joy at what he was about to do to me. The same look a hunter gets when the animal finally steps into the open. I felt the blood drain from my face. I saw the glee in his eyes, and I understood, all at once, that our peace had never been free. He had come to collect his favor. Story 4. My job comes home with me every night. I teach high school English, and most of my time outside the classroom is spent grading. When you have 60 students turning in creative writing, it becomes a mountain of paper fast. It's tiring in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't done it. Page after page of the same plots, the same twists, the same lines that sound like they were copied from whatever show was popular that week. After a while, I built a routine. I stayed late at school to grade because it was quieter there. During the day, there's always someone knocking, asking questions, laughing in the hallway, calling your name. At night, the building turns into something else, empty still like it's holding its breath. The main entrance locks automatically at 6. By 7, the custodial staff is usually done with my floor. After that, I'm on my own. I used to find that comforting. No distractions, no interruptions, just me, my desk lamp, and a stack of papers I could finally get through. 2 weeks ago, I gave my students an easy assignment. I didn't want anyone stressing over it, and I didn't want to read anything overly complicated. The prompt was simple. Write a suspenseful scene and use environmental details to build tension. They had 3 days. On Thursday night, I stayed after the last activity buses left. By then, the building was as silent as it ever gets. The only sounds were the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional clunk from the heating pipes hidden inside the walls. I sat at my desk at the front of the classroom, red pen in hand, working through the pile. My room is on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway that doesn't have windows. During the day, it's just another hallway. At night, it feels like a tunnel. Around 9, I pulled a paper from the middle of the stack. It belonged to the transfer student who had joined my class about a month earlier. He was quiet in a way that went beyond normal shyness. He didn't answer questions. He didn't whisper to other kids. He never spoke at all. If I asked him something directly, he would nod or shake his head. If I gave him a worksheet, he'd fill it out perfectly. If I assigned an essay, he'd turn it in on time, clean, and careful. The strangest part was his handwriting. It was so neat it didn't look real. Every letter was sharp and exact, like it had been printed by a machine. Even the spacing was perfect. No cross-outs, no smudges. It always looked like a final draft, even when everyone else's papers were full of eraser marks and scratched-out words. I adjusted my glasses and started reading. There was no title, no warm-up. It dropped me straight into the scene. The story was about a high school English teacher staying late to grade papers. He was alone in his classroom at night. The writing itself was unusually good, better than what most adults can do, honestly. The sentences flowed naturally, like someone who had spent years reading and writing, not a teenager trying to hit a word count. But it wasn't the quality that made my stomach tighten. It was the details. He described the layout of my classroom exactly. The placement of my desk, the rows of student desks, the posters on the cinder block walls. Not just posters, either. He described them in a way that made it clear he wasn't guessing. He mentioned the specific one about symbolism, the one about common grammar mistakes, the faded motivational poster that had been there long before I got the room. He wrote about the sound of a red pen scraping across cheap-lined paper. He wrote about the silence of an empty building. He even mentioned the low hum of the fluorescent lights, something most people don't notice until it's the only sound left. He wasn't just writing about a teacher. He was writing about me, about what I was doing right then, at that exact moment, while I sat there reading his words. I stopped and looked up, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. The classroom was empty. The door was closed. I always lock it when I stay late. There was no one inside, no movement behind the desks, nothing. For a second, I told myself the explanation was simple. He must have stayed late one day. Maybe he saw me through the narrow glass window in my door. Maybe he'd paid attention to the room during class and used it to make his story feel real. It was creepy, yes, and it crossed a line, but it wasn't impossible. Still, it felt like someone had reached into my personal space and touched something they shouldn't have. The kind of violation that makes your skin crawl even if nothing bad has happened yet. I decided right then that I would speak to the administration in the morning. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a kid being observant. I looked back down at the paper and kept reading, wanting to finish it and mark it up like any other assignment. The next part focused on the lights. He wrote that the teacher was so concentrated on grading that he didn't notice a subtle change in the electricity. He described the fluorescent lights above the desk starting to flicker in a specific pattern. 2 quick bursts of darkness, then a longer pause, then one final short burst. As my eyes hit the end of that sentence, the room went completely black. Not dim, not a soft flicker. Full darkness, like someone had flipped a switch for the whole world. It only lasted a fraction of a second before the lights snapped back on. I had just enough time to suck in a sharp breath. Then they went out again. Back on, out again. 2 quick bursts. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat frozen, red pen still in my hand, not even blinking. The lights stayed off longer this time, 3 seconds maybe. Long enough to make the darkness feel heavy, like it had weight. Then the lights came back on, flickered out one final time for a brief instant, and returned to their steady, buzzing glow. 2 short, 1 long, 1 short. The exact pattern the student had written. I stared at the ceiling fixtures, trying to force my brain into logic. The building is old. The wiring has issues. Storms had rolled through last week, and we'd already had a few power hiccups. This could happen. It could be coincidence. The human mind is good at connecting dots that don't belong together. But I couldn't ignore the timing, the way it happened as I read it. The way the paper on my desk suddenly felt less like an assignment and more like a script. My hands started to shake. I steadied them by gripping the edges of the desk, forcing myself to breathe slowly through my nose. Then I read the last paragraph. It was only 3 sentences. He described the teacher sitting in the silence after the flicker, afraid in a way he couldn't explain. He described the fear tightening in the teacher's chest. And then he wrote that a heavy knock sounded against the outside of the second-floor window. I reached the last word. A sharp, solid knock hit the glass to my right. I dropped the paper. The sound of it hitting the desk was small, pathetic compared to the noise my chair made as I shoved backward. The legs scraped hard against the linoleum as I stumbled away. I stared at the window. The shades were up. The glass was dark, reflecting the bright interior lights like a mirror. And beyond it was nothing but open air and the concrete courtyard far below, 20 feet down at least. There was no fire escape, no ledge, no scaffolding, nothing anyone could stand on. There was nothing outside that window, and yet something had knocked. I backed up until I was pressed against the chalkboard, my chest rising and falling too fast. I waited for another knock. I waited for a face to appear in the glass. I waited for anything that would make this make sense. Nothing happened. The silence stretched until it felt like it was choking me. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. I could hear the hum of the lights. I could hear the building settling, the pipes ticking as heat moved through them. I didn't finish grading. I didn't even pack neatly. I shoved the papers into my briefcase, grabbed my coat, and ran. I sprinted down the empty hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the doors locked, breathing like I'd just escaped something I couldn't see. The next morning, I arrived early, before students came in. I went straight to the main office and logged into the staff system. I pulled up the transfer students file. There wasn't much there. Large sections were missing, like someone had intentionally removed information. What I could see made me uneasy. In 4 years, he'd been enrolled in 6 different districts, sometimes in different states. No discipline records, no notes from counselors, nothing that explained why he kept moving. It was like he would show up, stay a little while, and then disappear. I opened a browser and started searching local newspaper archives for each place listed in his file. It took a while. Some towns had better records than others. Some articles were behind paywalls. Some names didn't show up unless I tried different searches. After about an hour, I found the pattern, and my face went cold. Every district he attended had a fatal accident involving a member of staff. In one place, a longtime PE teacher was found dead in a storage room after an unusual allergic reaction while moving equipment late at night. In another, a librarian fell from a rolling ladder after closing, hit her neck on a table corner, and died instantly. There were more. A heart attack in a locked boiler room. A fall down a stairwell with the lights out. A shop teacher badly injured by a bandsaw that supposedly bypassed its safety features. Different towns, different years, different circumstances. But the same shape to every story, a staff member alone in the building after hours. A death ruled accidental. And then, days later, the transfer student was gone. I sat staring at the computer screen, sweat forming at my hairline, even though the office was cool. The memory of the flickering lights and the knock returned so clearly it felt like it was happening again. I imagined the student sitting somewhere, writing, or watching, or doing something I didn't understand at all. I knew I couldn't go to the police. What would I say, that a teenager was killing teachers with short stories? I had no proof, no video, no witnesses. Every death had been ruled an accident. If I told the principal, the best-case scenario would be awkward sympathy and a note recommending I take time off. The worst-case scenario would be a mandatory evaluation and my career quietly ending in paperwork. So I needed to know for sure. That afternoon, I returned graded papers to my students. When I put his assignment on his desk, I watched him closely. He didn't look at me. He didn't react. He slid the paper into his folder and stared at the chalkboard like it was the only thing in the room. Before the bell, I gave them a surprise weekend assignment. I told them to write a short descriptive scene about a close encounter with something unknown. Mandatory, no exceptions. I spent the weekend barely sleeping. I kept thinking about the lights, about the window, about the articles. I kept hearing that knock in my head, like it had left an imprint. On Monday, I collected the assignments. I placed his paper at the bottom of the stack without looking at it. When the last bell rang and the building emptied, I locked my classroom door from the inside. I pulled the shades down over the windows. I didn't want to see outside. I didn't want anything outside to see in. Then I sat at my desk and pulled his paper out from the bottom of the pile. Same perfect handwriting, same careful spacing. I took a deep breath and started reading. The story described a teacher sitting alone in a locked classroom, afraid. The door to the hallway was shut tight. Then the writing introduced the sound. Urgent knocking at the classroom door. I stopped reading. I listened. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then 3 sharp knocks hit my door. I jerked so hard my chair shifted. My hand tightened around the paper. I didn't move. I stayed seated, as if standing would somehow make this more real. I forced myself to read the next line. The story said the teacher heard a voice from the hallway asking to be let in. The voice, the student wrote, sounded exactly like the principal. "Hello?" came a voice from the other side of my door. My whole body went cold. It was the principal's voice, perfectly copied. Same rough tone, same slight nasal sound. If I'd heard it in the hallway during the day, I wouldn't have questioned it. "Are you still in there?" the voice said. "I need you to open the door. I forgot my master keys." The words were right, but something about the rhythm was wrong. The voice didn't rise and fall naturally. It sounded flat, like someone imitating a recording without understanding how real speech moves. I looked down again and kept reading. The student wrote that the teacher stood up, crossed the room slowly, and reached for the handle with a shaking hand. And I stood up, not because I chose to, because my body decided to obey the words. My chair slid back. My boots scuffed against the tile as I walked forward. I could feel myself moving like someone else was guiding me. I stopped at the door. I lifted my hand. My fingers hovered inches from the metal lever. The voice spoke again. "Please open the door. I need to come inside." I looked down at the paper, my breath thin and fast. The next part said the teacher suddenly felt doubt, a deep realization that the voice wasn't real. It said he recognized it as a trick, something trying to get in. The story ended with him pulling his hand away, stepping back and refusing to open the door. I pulled my hand back and stepped away. The instant I did, the feeling on the other side of the door vanished, like someone had turned off a pressure in the air. The hallway became only a hallway again. The voice stopped completely. I backed up until I hit my desk, shaking so hard my knees felt weak. Now I knew. The student wasn't just observant. He wasn't just writing realistic suspense. Something about his words made things happen. When I read them, they unfolded around me like I was trapped inside his scene. And worse, he could control me too. He'd written me standing up and reaching for the door, and my body followed. He'd written my hesitation, my doubt, my refusal, and only then did I stop. That meant my survival depended on what he decided to write. The pattern from the other schools snapped into place in my mind. He moved from district to district. Teachers died alone after hours. Accidents that didn't quite make sense. And then he left, clean and quiet. I was next. The next assignment would be the one that didn't end with me stepping away. I considered running, quitting, leaving the state overnight, but the idea didn't help. If his writing could reach me here, why couldn't it reach me on a highway? He could write about a former teacher dying in a crash. He could write about a gas leak, a fall, a random wrong place, wrong time. I couldn't go to the police, and I couldn't outrun words that could bend reality. But I did have one advantage. I understood how stories work. On Wednesday, I gave one more writing assignment. I told the class to write about a final confrontation. I kept my voice steady. I acted normal. I smiled when students complained. I collected the papers like it was any other week. On Friday afternoon, the transfer student handed his paper in. As he placed it on my desk, he looked up at me. It was the first real eye contact we'd made. His eyes were dark and empty, like there was nothing behind them. And there was a small smile, not friendly, not shy, cruel, like he was enjoying the fact that I finally understood. He knew I was scared. He wanted me to be. That night, I waited until the building was empty. Fridays are quieter and the custodians often finish earlier. By 6, the school felt abandoned in the deepest sense. No voices, no footsteps. Just the building itself, huge and hollow. I locked my classroom door. I pulled the shades down. I sat at my desk. I placed his paper flat in front of me. And I didn't read it. I believed, hoped, that the events only happened when I processed the words, that the story didn't activate until it entered my mind. I had seen it happen twice now. The lights flickered as I read the sentence. The knock came as I reached the last word. The voice started as I read about it, like reading was the trigger. So instead of reading, I picked up my red pen and uncapped it. Carefully, I moved my hand to the very bottom of the page, below his final paragraph, without letting my eyes focus on what he'd written above. I kept my gaze low, like I was trying not to look at something dangerous. Then I wrote my own ending. I wrote fast, the way you write when you don't want to give yourself time to doubt. I described a sudden change outside, a violent shift in the weather. I wrote about a thunderstorm rolling in too quickly to be normal, with rain hitting the windows in sheets. I wrote that, at the peak of the horror, a bright bolt of lightning struck the courtyard outside my classroom window, close enough to feel, loud enough to shake the room. I wrote that the flash of light terrified whatever had come for me, forcing it to run, panicked and blind, back into the dark hallways. I wrote that it fled and never returned. I ended with a hard period, like a nail hammered into wood. Then I dropped the pen and finally lifted my eyes to the top of the page. I began to read. His story was short and direct. He described the teacher alone, waiting, locked inside the classroom. He wrote that there was no knock this time, no warning. Instead, the lock on the door slid open on its own, moved by a force that didn't need keys. A loud metallic click snapped through the room. I looked up at my door. The deadbolt knob rotated slowly, turning until it stopped in the unlocked position. My mouth went dry. My skin prickled. I forced my eyes back to the page. The next sentence described the handle pressing down slowly and the door swinging open to the dark hallway. In front of me, the metal lever lowered as if an invisible hand held it. The hinges groaned as the door opened, inch by inch, until the black hallway was fully exposed. I couldn't stop reading. I didn't know if stopping would freeze the scene or leave it half-finished in the worst way. So I kept going, even as my pulse thudded through my entire body. The student wrote that something moved into the light of the classroom. He described it in clean, calm detail, like he was describing an insect under glass. I looked up. Something crossed the threshold. At first, my brain tried to understand it as separate parts that didn't belong together. A human torso, pale and swollen, shining as if it were wet. No head, no arms. The neck ended in a smooth, sealed stump, like it had healed wrong. And then I saw the face. A huge, distorted human face stretched across the center of its chest. Wide eyes that didn't blink, set high over where ribs would be. A mouth pulled across its stomach, lipless, showing broken teeth that looked jagged and old. Below that, instead of hips and legs, it had something like a spider's body. Segmented black limbs, thick and covered in coarse hair, ending in sharp points that clicked against the floor. It moved with a horrible speed, skittering across the tiles like it was too heavy for how fast it could go. Each step gouged thin scratches into the linoleum. Then the smell reached me, rotting meat, sweet and sour at the same time. strong enough to make my eyes water. The creature clicked, and the face on its chest twisted like it was hungry. It came straight toward my desk. Panic hit me so hard it felt like my mind tilted. For a moment, I was sure my plan hadn't done anything. My red ink felt childish, a tiny defense against something solid and impossible. I backed up until my spine hit the chalkboard. I was trapped between the wall and my desk. Nowhere to go. Still, I kept reading because the paper was the only thing that had ever given me any control. The creature raised the front half of its body, spider legs lifting as it prepared to launch itself. The mouth on its stomach opened wider than it should have been able to, stretching into a dark throat that seemed to pulse. I shut my eyes and braced, certain I was about to feel teeth. A crash of thunder slammed into the building. I opened my eyes. Rain hit the window to my right in sudden, violent sheets. It wasn't a gentle storm. It was loud, hard, like handfuls of gravel thrown at the glass. The classroom seemed to change temperature in an instant, the air turning heavy and damp. The creature froze and turned its chest face toward the window, confused, almost startled. Then the lightning hit. A massive bolt struck the courtyard outside exactly where I had written it would. The flash was so bright it erased the shadows. For a split second, the entire room was pure white light, sharp and burning. The thunder that followed wasn't just loud. It shook my teeth, rattled the desks, made the window vibrate in its frame. The creature recoiled like it had been struck. The face on its chest twisted in agony. It let out a thin, high sound that didn't match its size, a shriek that made my stomach lurch. It spun around in panic, its legs scrambling against the floor, and then it fled. It skittered back through the open doorway into the dark hallway, moving so fast it was almost a blur. The clicking of its limbs echoed away, getting smaller and smaller until it vanished into silence. I slid down the chalkboard and collapsed on the floor, gasping like I'd been underwater. The storm kept pounding the window. The rain kept coming, exactly as I'd written, as if my paragraph had reached out into the world and pulled the weather into place. It had worked. When I could finally stand, I crossed the room on shaking legs. I grabbed the metal trash can from the corner and pulled a lighter from my desk drawer. My hands fumbled, but I managed to flick it on. I dropped the paper into the bin and set it on fire. The flames ate through the perfect handwriting first. The words curled into black and broke apart. The description of the door. The description of the creature. And finally, my own red ink ending, burning away like it had never existed. I stayed there and watched until nothing was left but gray ash. I didn't leave the room until I was sure the page was gone completely. The next morning, students came in for first period like any other day. Backpacks thumping onto desks, loud voices, complaints about homework, a normal world that felt almost fake after what I'd lived through. Then the transfer student walked in. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me behind my desk. For the first time, his expression wasn't blank. His face was tight with anger. His jaw looked clenched hard enough to ache. The quiet, distant calm was gone. He stared at me like I had insulted him in the deepest way possible, like I had broken a rule that mattered. He didn't sit down. He didn't even step fully into the room. He turned around and walked away. About an hour later, the office called to tell me his parents had come in and unenrolled him. They were moving again. Just like all the other times. He's gone from my district now. But he's still out there somewhere, moving from school to school, quiet and careful, carrying that ability with him like a weapon no one else can see. I'm posting this wherever teachers might read it. Staff forums, admin boards, anywhere educators share advice and stories. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I wouldn't have believed me, not before this. But if you're a teacher and you stay late grading and you find a student paper that describes your room too well, your habits too well, your sounds and lights and silence too perfectly, stop. Don't keep reading. Get a red pen and write your own ending before he finishes his.